Hi, everybody. I'm Roberto Alvarez. I'm the Executive Director of the GFCC. Welcome to the GFCC Now Bridge Reboot Conversation Series. We are getting started now. I will take a few minutes to explain to you a bit about the GFCC itself and also our session today. Kandi, thanks for joining. I see you. The GFCC is a global multi-stakeholder organization. Our members are corporations, universities, government agencies, and private sector councils and industry bodies. Combining our members and our fellows, we have a footprint in 30 countries today. We are starting now Bridge and Reboot today, this conversation series. It will include 8 sessions. This is the first one, so please stay tuned. And before we actually start the conversation, I wanted to talk with you about 3 things. What this is about. Second, what is the session today about? What are the topics and things that we're reviewing? And third, a bit about the logistics, the flow, the dynamics, and how to use the platform that we are using today. So I think that really the catalyzer for this is the COVID-19 crisis. We know that the world has changed. But why do we say now Bridge and Reboot? Now countries, organizations are really responding to this crisis and trying to understand what comes next. We hope that we can, in the future, reboot society, the economy, and hopefully create even better systems and a more prosperous economy and a prosperous society. And in order to do that, we really need to bridge the now with the future. And that's because of that we call now Bridge and Reboot. So what do we want to do in this conversation series? First, we want to share ideas. Second, we want to foster collective thinking. We are all learning, and I'll be back to that. And third, we want to shape action. So if you have one idea, please feel free to share with us. We want to see how the GFCC and our global community could potentially engage with you and hopefully help some initiatives to be moved forward. We have some general discussion questions for the whole series. We want to understand the strategies and solutions that are being deployed around the globe. We want to understand long-term implications, but also maybe what are some of the opportunities that we have now. As I said, we have 8 dialogues. The next one will be on May the 20th. Join us there. Second point, what is the conversation today about? Well, bridging crisis and future prosperity really covers the whole spectrum of issues that we proposed for this conversation series. And we want to know a bit more about the state of the world in the different countries that our guest speakers are today. We want to know about some of the things, some of the impacts that we can already have clarity about and have an understanding. But once again, what comes next and how could we potentially help to catalyze a transition to a more prosperous future and state? We have 4 amazing speakers today, in addition to GFCC President Deborah Winston-Smith and myself, and I will briefly introduce each one of those, starting with Deborah. Deborah is the president of the GFCC. She also is the president and CEO of the U.S. Council on Competitiveness, a nonpartisan leadership coalition of CEOs, university presidents, labor leaders, and national laboratory directors in the U.S. Deborah had an outstanding career in the U.S. government. She worked for more than 20 years in the U.S. government. She was the first Senate confirming Assistant Secretary for Technology Policy in the U.S. Department of Commerce and did things like overseeing the implementation of tech transfer offices in the United States. We have happy and lucky to have Chad Holliday as our chairman in the GFCC. Chad has a fantastic career in business. He led DuPont, where he was the chairman and CEO. After that, he was the chairman of Bank of America. He sits on the boards of different companies since 2015. He's the chair of the board of directors of Royal Dutch Shell. We have Hiro Ichiguchi coming from Japan. Hiro is the co-founder and chief executive of the Japan Innovation Network. That is a nonprofit that was created to accelerate innovation in Japan back in 2015. Prior to that, here was the executive managing director of Japan's largest public-private investment fund, and he was a global partner for Mercer Consulting. We have come from Portugal. We have Professor Isabel Gil. Isabel is the president of the Catholic University of Portugal. She's a full professor of cultural studies, and she's the first woman ever to be appointed as the president of the International Federation of Catholic Universities. And finally, we have Kande Yunkela joining us from Sierra Leone. Kande, it's a member of the parliament of Sierra Leone. He has been shaping a lot of political transformations in the country and working on that. He had an outstanding career in the United Nations, where he was an undersecretary and was the director general for the United Nations Development Organization. And Kande also co-chaired, together with Chet Holliday, the Sustainable Energy for All initiative. So amazing speakers today. I think that we will all learn from them, and this is really the spirit of this conversation. Finally, just to review the logistics with you, after my brief introduction, I will turn to Deborah. She will make initial remarks, and then in a sequence, we'll have each one of our guests speaking, sharing their thoughts with all of you. Each one of them will have like 5 to 6 minutes. We really want to give time to our speakers to share their perspectives, their thoughts, their experiences, and their learnings. Deborah and I will facilitate a conversation. We will collect and curate questions coming from you. Please use the Q&A feature here to provide questions that we can address in this conversation. If you go to the bottom of the page, there's Q&A. Use that feature to provide your questions. The chat will be here. We'll be using the chat with speakers. So once again, please use Q&A. This whole session will last for 90 minutes, an hour and a half. We will tweet about this conversation and the whole series. We're using the GFCC Twitter handle. It is @THEGFCC. So please join the conversation in social media too, and feel free to engage with us. The session is being recorded. It will be available afterwards for colleagues who do not have a chance to join us at this moment. Before we get started, I just wanted to share two quick ideas with you. The first is that this is an unprecedented time. I would say that this is a time of exacerbated uncertainty. So in some way, facts are unfolding. There are lots of things that we don't know yet. And exactly because of that, we see value in this type of engagement, hearing different perspectives coming from different sectors, from leaders that are driving the response and especially thinking about the future in different parts of the globe. And the second idea is that in some way, we are all partners in ignorance as we're learning more about the situation that unfolds. What we want to do here is once again to give time to our speakers to share their thoughts and really to provide an environment in which we could learn what they have learned. I think as we are all learning, what have you, or distinguished speakers, learned so far? What are you expecting to the future? So thank you so much for joining. And without further ado, I would like to turn to you, Deborah, for your remarks.
Thank you, Roberto. And let me add my welcome to everyone on the line, as well as our distinguished panelists for the first in our series of GFCC conversations. As Roberto has said, we are living in absolutely unprecedented times, and I would characterize the uncertainty and the unpredictability of our lives with sort of a few other major trends that are underway. And the first is really the disruption we're all feeling in every dimension of life, economy, as well as our families. The second is divergence, because we're seeing a lot of different strategies and responses and ways to deal with the COVID-19 global pandemic. And we're seeing decoupling. We're seeing decoupling of supply chains, relationships, partnerships, as well as in our respective countries, how different sectors are responding and coming together and not coming together to deal with this tremendous challenge that has changed our lives. And then the last is probably what we've been hearing a lot, and many of us are living as well in business, is deglobalization. So I want to just give a few overarching thoughts and share some comments about the United States perspective as well. We have seen how governments around the world are responding to the COVID crisis in different ways, everything from very extreme, somewhat authoritarian lockdowns to more loose strategies such as Sweden, and then in between with various outcomes. Governments are really now center stage as they struggle to respond to this multidimensional crisis, because it's spanning public health systems, supplies of medicine, our educational environment. Many countries, children are no longer at school, they're learning at home. Our universities have shut down. Students are now doing their courses on remote learning. In fact, in the United States, some of our universities have moved very, very quickly to put over 40,000 learners online within a matter of days. That's a tremendous innovation accomplishment. Of course, finance, access to capital, and liquidity are huge issues. I've mentioned the global supply chains. Certainly in the United States, I think it's come as a tremendous shock about the vulnerability of our pharmaceutical, medical device, and healthcare supply system, and what has that meant in responding to the pandemic and the need for everything from personal protective equipment to ventilators and the things that are needed in hospitals, as well as all the other surrounding infrastructure to both treat patients and to patient issues. We've also, of course, seen service delivery. We sort of have now almost two economies: those who are staying at home, working remotely, sheltered, and those frontline workers who are out ensuring that we have food, that we have the ability to get our medicines, all the deliveries and things that are bringing life to our homes. And around the world, and certainly in the United States, the service workers and the people who are in critical manufacturing enterprises are really not only of the entire of our human work environment, and how important this is in a way that perhaps we have not realized. Leaders, of course, are dealing with the imperative to communicate in different ways with their colleagues and partners. And I certainly think, from the perspective I'm seeing, that over communication is good right now. And we joke that we're perhaps over Zoomed with meetings, but making sure that we are all safe and secure as we move through this time is very, very important part of felt leadership. Interestingly, in the era of big data and the proliferation of information, the tsunami of information, we haven't really had the integrity and the cleansing of data we need to make critical decisions. And many of these decisions are being made in real time with imperfect information, and often in some of the models for the COVID pandemic, information that perhaps has taken us in a direction that might not have been as wise as one we would have taken had we had, the full access to data that has been promised in the era of big data. So that is another area innovation in this living out now, with layoffs, tremendous stress on our economy, has taken some immediate steps to shore up small and medium-sized businesses. But interestingly, we have a proverbial disconnect underway. And I don't know if disconnect's the right word, but from rights and of the federal government and what we call states' rights. So interestingly, we have guidelines from the federal government, from the administration. We have both political parties that are still form way. We have some states that are beginning to come back to work a little bit, others that are still on lockdown. And we have a Congress that is unfortunately very partisan and not moving forward in concert, as we have in other times of great national crisis. So these are some of the challenges we're facing in the US in terms of the immediate dealing with the COVID pandemic. However, the excitement is tremendous. Innovation is underway. We're seeing this in our universities, we're seeing it in our national labs, and of course in large companies, as well as the entrepreneurial economy. We're seeing a plethora of new products emerging, co-development. We're seeing large corporations that have been repositioned to make things such as ventilators and products that have been vulnerable because of the decoupling of our supply chains and the manufacturing of critical infrastructure that left the United States. So with that, you know, we think of the innovation capacity of our nation, our partners around the world. It is a time of great opportunity. I think many of you are aware the Council on Competitiveness has launched over a year ago our National Commission on Innovation and Competitiveness Frontiers. And while this is very much focused on the future, what are going to be the next drivers of productivity and inclusive prosperity, we are in effect dealing through the commission with many of the strategies and challenges to rebuild our economy. But very importantly, think about the next economy. And I want to give one example. A week or so ago, we had a Zoom session with over 40 university presidents in the United States. And they were sharing, of course, what's going on in their respective environments and many of the steps they're taking to ensure, hopefully, they will be able to open this fall while continuing remote learning. But all the stresses on the university system in the United States are profound. But as the call continued, there was a uniform commitment and desire from the university presidents in America to focus on the future. What can and should we be doing to build a sustainable, resilient future? Yes, in higher education, but in our extended communities, as well as with our partners around the world. So I want to just close by saying, before we hear from our other panelists, this time for it's a whole new generation of public-private partnerships and partnerships that extend outside of our boundaries and borders as nations. And three, this is a time for optimism because we know humans are innovators. We've had huge crises in human history. Interestingly, so many of them have been related to human health. And without human health and the security of health and the confidence, we will not see the economic growth and prosperity that will come from all the innovation that we're co-creating together. And through the GFCC, our work is more important than ever because we're all about coming together, working together to create a sustainable, prosperous economy for our citizens and the globe. So thank you, and we look forward to the other panelists and the discussion today.
Thank you, Deborah. Chad, I'll leave Deborah's optimism with you. The floor is yours.
Roberto, thank you very much. Deborah, thank you for those comments. I think you framed the subject extremely well. Today, I'll add 3 points. One around who are the stakeholders in this endeavor we're in. 2, how do we restart the world? And 3, some more specifics on how the energy industry is dealing with this and how that industry is thinking about the restart. I think more than ever before dealing with stakeholders, we understand everybody that's critical to our success. And before we talked about communities and we talked about our customers, our suppliers, employees, obviously the owners of companies from a business standpoint, but never before has it been so true and so critical in what we're doing. So I think I see a new awakening around what stakeholders are really about and how we must take them into account. Because we know, so for example, in manufacturing organizations, if the communities around those plants can't be successful and safe during this period of time, how does the plant operate? And so I think there's something very positive that can come of this. And we need to be sure that we are recording and learning from it and not seeing it as just a one-time event because of this, but how do we include all stakeholders much more completely in the future? Second, going to the restart. The really astute companies are focused right now on how they restart, at what pace they restart, and are not assuming that anything goes back to normal. And that is the most difficult part, because everything about us as humans wants to turn to all the history we have and say we will use that to focus us on the future. I don't think that will work. So the companies that I'm associated with are right now thinking about what does the restart look like? How do we make people feel comfortable with that? How have we maintained our employees during this period of time so they will be with us for the restart? I serve on the board of a hospital group, and we've guaranteed all of our employees 70% of their income so they'll stay with us during this period of time. Because although it's illogical that hospitals would be underutilized, they certainly are, because all the more traditional procedures have been delayed either by government order or just because of fear from people. So for a hospital to restart, it must be thinking about, how do you keep the staff of doctors and nurses and other technicians necessary for that to happen? So I believe every organization is going through that. What we have learned from this is resilience. And as Deborah knows quite well, at the council, we did a major study on resilience and how important that is at a time of major discontinuity. So the companies, as they think about their restart, they will think about what was really resilient about their systems and paid off for them and what wasn't. And they won't forget that. They will, in the restart, they will take that into account as they move forward. So I believe that's critical, that we're all being creative around that approach. And third is the energy system overall. Sometimes we forget because we take it for granted, but the energy system of functioning effectively through this crisis has been critically important for the world to be a success. We would not be having this call today if the utility industry wasn't providing electricity to all the services that are necessary. And we sometimes take that for granted, but just like other industries have stepped up, I am so pleased to see the energy industry has stepped up and made sure supplies continued through this very difficult period of time, although it disruptive. If I could just use a few examples from Shell, the company where I serve on the board, we have 44,000 service stations across the world, more branded service stations than any other company out there. Only 140 of the 44,000 have been shut through this period. An amazing effort by our people to keep those facilities open so emergency services and critical transportation infrastructure would have the energy they need to keep serving people. Secondly, if you look at those 44,000 stations, in a local basis, they have been repurposed. This wasn't some corporate directive to repurpose. This was the people locally looking at what the needs of the community. So in China, for example, as the restart was coming up in China, and barber shops were not open, we allowed people to come in and do barber work in our service stations. So it was a real need because we had the facility to provide that, something you would never find in a corporate plant. Secondly, because we have food service in many of these stations, we shifted the supplies in those services to critical foodstuffs that people needed so they could come to our station to get it. And then we found in many countries, we deployed either motorcycles or small delivery vehicles to actually deliver that food from our service station to people's individual homes. Something we never would have thought we were doing. But it's giving us insight as to different ways we could use these 44,000 stations in the world ahead that's making major changes. Also, we talk about dedication of police officers and ambulance drivers and healthcare workers, which has been fantastic. But we had an employee in China that worked 18 kilometers to open the service station, so it would be available for that, and 18 kilometers back home. A real dedication that goes on, and I think that's a very important part. So I stress here, not just the energy industry, but think about the many different organizations that have stepped up to the challenge as we go forward. The last thing I would leave you with from the energy standpoint is around climate change. I'm so glad my good friend Conde is on the call today, but we've worked a lot on climate change and what does it take to really have sustainable energy for all. And I think this is an opportunity because we've had a reset on how we're using energy and how that's impacting the climate change. We can learn a lot of things that have worked and hence accelerate our energy transition much quicker from this experience. At the same time, we'll understand where we've come up short and we must design differently. So although this is a crisis proportion I've never seen in my lifetime, and I surely hope not to see it again, shame on us if we don't learn from it as we go forward. Roberto, thank you very much. Very pleased to participate in the panel today. Turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Chad, and thanks for, I think, those great remarks and this idea of bottom-up innovation that in some way you highlighted and new opportunities that could come up. Hiro, to you from Japan. Thanks for joining. I know it's late there.
Don't worry about it. Deborah and Chad, thank you very much for your very insightful comments. And I also thank you very much for your invitation today. My view is that what we are going through is a restructuring of a civilization as a whole. I use this word not as a downsizing, but as a literally restructuring. Several fundamental preconditions for a civilization have been tested and challenged, and some of them have literally evaporated. As a result, people have been forced to take a series of different actions. Today's conversation is one of those examples. I don't think we could think of connecting these distinguished speakers, excluding me, to have a conversation like this last year. And close to 100 people are participating in this dialogue today. Interesting thing is that this conversation was possible from a technology perspective even last year, but not so possible from a psychology perspective. The technology existed, and so did psychological barriers, which prevented us from leveraging technology. Again, as I stated, our civilization is going through restructuring. By the way, all great leaders, CEOs, have two responsibilities during the restructuring period. Number one is to respond to the situation. Number two is to start designing the future. I'd like to talk about the importance of designing the future now. We often hear the words such as new normal, as if after COVID-19, everything will automatically phase into a new normal. I don't necessarily agree with this idea. Contrarily, there is a high possibility that the situation will simply bounce back to the point before this pandemic started. It is because many industries do exist based on preconditions, and it is much easier for their business to see that everything will bounce back to where we started. For their business, it might be better for all of us to bounce back to square one. However, is it really a good idea for our civilization and the planet? The irony is that this planet, I'm learning, by the way, every day, the irony is that this planet itself can live on even without our civilization, unfortunately. However, our civilization doesn't need this planet to continue its journey. Then the real question is, what is a future civilization we'd like to design? Since all nations are facing the pandemic as a human being at the same time, having a different idea of the future may be counterproductive in the long run. And I'd like to avoid that. By the way, all nations have agreed to pursue global goals or SDGs in 2015. And new global standard, innovation management system has become the ISO global standard last year. This is really to help existing organizations to become more innovative by introducing a new management system to keep innovating within and with other organizations, within the organization, and by working with others. So with these latest development, I think purpose-driven innovation is the answer to design the future. We have to agree and design a new purpose for civilization. And Chad just mentioned the keyword repurpose of the gas station. It's a wonderful story. I love it. And however, we have to really to agree and design a new purpose or for civilization, for stakeholders, for others. We also have to agree on the game plan to make it happen. This is the first time for all nations to experience the same pandemic at the same time at this scale in recorded history. So we need to work together to create a better civilization together. I keep using the word civilization today because this is a really civilization matter, I think. It's not, it is about the people, it is about society, it is about nation, it is about region, but as a whole, I think we are really looking at our civilization as a whole, because this civilization is going through the restructuring as we speak. So I think it will be too late to begin such a planning discussion, design discussion, by waiting for the end of a pandemic. It will be too late. I think even during the wartime, good leaders start working on the future, even during the wartime. With that, I think we need to start design work now without waiting for the end of pandemic. The design has to start right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hiro, and thanks for bringing this design perspective. I think that we heard from Deborah, Chad, and you about the importance of the future, but bringing the word design. Thanks for that. Isabel, the floor is yours. I really love your library, and we all love your comments.
Thank you very much, Roberto. Well, we were just saying earlier that we have everything we need. We have the angels, nature behind Hiro and books, and this is what civilization is about. But first, I want to say thank you for having invited me to share some thoughts on the moment we live and how to move forward. And I want to congratulate the GFCC on this conversation series, this action-driven conversation series, because I think this is absolutely crucial in the moment we live in, that we do not feel helpless, reacting to dangers, reacting to fear, but really taking hold, acting and moving forward in the conditions that we live in, and that the IMF has so pointedly called the Great Lockdown. And I would start my comments there. I think our the challenge of the Great Lockdown is a challenge to our civilizational model, as Hiro was saying, to the notion of an open society in political terms, a society that is business savvy, that is focused on growth, on the free mobility of people, on free speech, that is inclusive. These ground foundational values of what Popper called the open society are at stake now, because what is basically at stake is the glue that brings all of this together, and that is trust. We start with political trust in the leadership to deal with the pandemic, with data that, as Deborah just pointed out, is not always robust. We do not, despite the best efforts of the scientific community, we are dealing with the best data available, but it is questionable where all the data is out there and easily accessible for those who are working in solutions, pharmaceutical solutions, economic solutions to deal with the situation we're living in. Then as well, trust in the global business networks. We've seen that with the crisis in the supply of medical products that the global demand requires, because manufacturing has been concentrated in disease-stricken areas of the globe, and the fact that many countries do not have the industrial and manufacturing infrastructure to produce all the materials that are needed to deal with the pandemic. This has, as Deborah pointed out, brought an added stress on our trust in globalization and in the global business networks that were created in that event. Also for universities, my sector, and for science, this brings another stress in trust. A German thinker in the 19th century, Goethe, said, well, science is one of those endeavors that is not a patriotic endeavor because it is based on international collaboration in the sharing of best practices. And what we see is this divergent model, again, to use a term that Deborah used, that is on the one hand, very strong collaboration, and on the other, extreme mistrust on the information that is being released by in some of the most disease-stricken areas of the globe. And I'm thinking, for instance, of the information that has been disseminated from China to other parts of the globe. So the challenge or the pressure on trust that is eroding what we basically consider our model of an open society, I would say it can be then looked into with a national focus and then with an international focus. And I will focus my remarks there now on the national and then the international. The first aspect, which is more industrial and economic, has to do with a rising awareness that it is important to restructure industrial capabilities. This has certainly been the case in Europe. The European Commission is issuing a number of policies and stimulus programs to reboot the European industry. And so we see there already a movement of transformation vis-a-vis the delocalization of manufacturing that was the global trends in a way over the past 2 decades. That is not to say that the global networks will not survive after COVID, but certainly they will be coupled with investment in national infrastructure. that is again, this fact is coupled with what some have referred as the return of politics. So the new role of the state in devising stimulus policies, and policies on the one hand to deal with the health crisis, secondly, and to protect the health of citizens, but also at the same time to devise stimulus packages that will enable the economy to be rekindled, to reboot after the great confinement, and initiatives that were previously considered, for instance, within the scope of European policies, as not possible, namely the protection of national businesses by the national states, is now being transformed, this awareness. And we've seen that with the bailout of Adidas by the German government, or the investment in Lufthansa to save the airline industry, which is certainly one of the industries that is going to be stronger under stress after the end of the lockdown. And we see the same movement in the Portuguese case, with the rising awareness that the state will have to step in to save the national airline TAP, because that is a sector that is considered crucial for the global positioning of the country. So we see this mix of policies, a return or a rebooting of national industry and national manufacturing streams, the return of the state, and that, I may say, needs as well, we as individual citizens and as leaders of organizations in different sectors, it is important to see that, to take into consideration that these are exceptional measures, and that free enterprise and the models, the democratic models that have shaped the open society will have, hopefully in the future, the possibility of returning. Now, I want to focus as well on the issue of universities and my sector. We've seen that the pandemic is precisely creating a huge stress on universities that, as the term itself says, are global in nature. If they want to be relevant, they need to be projected. Their power and their knowledge and the knowledge streams that they create are positioned on an international scale. So I always say that our competitors are not national; they are international. That's where you position yourself, and that is coupled with, of course, a regular networking in research, also in the cooperation with industry and business that is not simply done on a local level, but that spills over our national borders. And also, most importantly, with the recruiting of international students. And that is certainly an element that for some universities, more than for others, is under duress. The ability to attract international students that provide for a very strong revenue stream. But for universities as well, what is at stake here is the educational model. 24 hours after we had to suspend face-to-face activities, we moved into online platforms. So the whole university was able to move into different platforms and continue lecturing and instruction on that level. Certainly, we're faced with a group or a generation that is geared towards adapting easily to technology. But there is something in our model of instruction, and that has certainly been one of the lessons learned. It is that students also require, and for them, it is absolutely important to have the on-campus experience. So as I see the future of the sector evolving, I see that there will certainly be a downsizing of universities that are able to thrive in this very competitive economy, and that will see a two-tier system of universities, small ones that will be able to continue operating on a strictly online model, and others that will have the opportunity and the ability to continue to fulfill face-to-face and use the campus experience as one of their hallmarks, but that will certainly also need to be coupled with a blended approach, with a technological approach to learning. And I can say some things about this later. And yeah, I will leave it at that, because in a way I mingled the looking in and the looking out, the looking out in my earlier comments, and we can continue afterwards. Thank you.
That's wonderful, Isabel. I think that you brought this idea of model change for, so you cover several aspects, but this idea of a change of model, a model that is transforming for the critical industry as education, not to mention the society model and democracy. So thanks for that. Kande, I think that you can, Kande, I think that you can,
Can you hear me?
Okay. So Kande, the floor is yours. Thanks for joining. The floor is yours. It would be great to have your perspective. It would be great to have your perspective.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Well, it's a pleasure to be back with Chad in action again. Good to see you, Chad, and Deborah as well. Good to see you, Chad. Let me give you the perspective from a developing country. I'm talking to you from Sierra Leone. Of course, we've had a bad experience with Ebola. Ebola affected Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea. It was not too difficult for the rest of the world to respond, because they could easily send in help, because the problem was localized to these three countries. We have a situation now where COVID is affecting those very countries that came to the rescue of the rest of the world to make sure that the Ebola pandemic does not affect
I think that we lost Kande, so we're back as soon as he reconnects. So I think one of the things that we're seeing around the globe is infrastructures are overstretched, digital infrastructures. So I hope Kande can reconnect shortly for us to continue. While we wait for Kande, maybe we could see if there are any reactions for the moment, any comments and ideas. Deborah, Chad, Hero, Isabel, would like to add something, or anyone taking part in this conversation would like to share an idea or a question? Okay. Here. Hero, would you like to say something?
Yeah. Why not? Actually, I really liked everybody's comment, but also I think the fundamental theme I'm hearing is the need for, let's say, the way we might, the way the world or the way we say might be different, but say fundamentally model change or repurposing. And I think maybe we can talk about this prospect a little bit more among us, because this seems to be a very fundamental theme for us. And also, my point of view is the model change just doesn't happen by coincidence. It has to be designed by us. And right now, since we're going through the crisis, we are forced to change the model. But how can we make this change as sustainable as a new model in the future? And then again, my point of view is really we have to start designing new model in a sustainable way. So again, I'm just jumping and kicking off the discussion just for ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you.
Roberto, this
Chad.
is Chad. If I could build on your early statement, it was restructuring civilization as a whole. I think that's very insightful and clearly what we're addressing here today. But Hiro, from your perspective, how do we make sure we restructure it in the right way and we learn from this? I think that's what you were just referring to. And because go back to the other comments about politics and so forth. Oh, Kandi's back.
We don't have enough bandwidth here, but quickly, I give you the perspective from a developing country. For countries like Sierra Leone, a lot of developing countries, the immediate challenge of COVID has been access to materials to be able to do adequate testing. Second, access to immediate support to create fiscal space. Let me give you a context in Sierra Leone. When 2 months ago in my country, 7.5 million people, we had only 370 test kits and only 3 laboratories that could do testing. We had capacity to at any one time to be able to hospitalize only about 100 people at any one time. That was about 2 months ago, 0 infections. In the last 4 weeks, we've gone to 200 infections. About 1,500 people still going in and out of quarantine. I think you can take that to a number of poorer African countries and just to make the case, limited capacity to deal with COVID. So the immediate need has been, how do we quickly ramp up to have testing materials, PPEs, and other facilities in case the outbreak happens, to be able to treat people. I give you another scary figure. The whole country had 8 ventilators. And of course, if you have 8, by the time you take 2 out for emergency, for the head of state and the first family, the whole country is left with 5 or 6. So my first issue for you is that for developing countries, we need to do a whole lot to build their health care infrastructure. Some have fared well. Ghana, for example, South Africa and others seem to have some capacity. But of course, if the United States is struggling with capacity, or Italy, you can imagine the challenges for other developing countries. The second issue is the economic impact. Even though we did not have Corona yet, or we don't have it at a large scale, we're already impacted because we can't trade much now. Simple example, most of our traders go to China to buy cheap consumer goods to bring back. They couldn't move. And so this is typical in a number of African countries where China, Dubai, and other locations, India, are becoming primary suppliers of cheap consumer items. The other element of financial constraints is the worry by governments that they do not have enough reserves to put together basic support to industry, basic support to the banks, so that they do not collapse. Fortunately, the World Bank and others got together very quick to begin to put resources together to immediately release to developing countries, based on the experience they had with the 2008-2009 financial crisis. Now, this crisis is worse than that. So moving forward, we're going to see challenges still for developing countries in terms of how badly their economies have been battered by COVID. So some of what you mentioned about the disruption of supply chains will affect them. The drop in the demand for commodities could affect them badly, because some of these economies are very monocultural. They depend on one or two minerals for the viability of their economy. So you're going to see some of these very immediate supply side challenges for these countries. But the real scary one, whether it is Sierra Leone, India, Pakistan, or Bangladesh, or South Africa, is if these countries have massive infections, which will force the governments to quarantine their people, there will be political instability, because the governments are not able to provision the people in quarantines with food, clean water, and essential materials. We saw in South Africa, after a few weeks, people were angry, they came out. We've seen some of that in India as well. In my country, we've seen a little bit of that, not a whole lot. But the governments are worried. If there is large-scale quarantine, can they supply food and materials? So that worry is important. It could cause political instability in some countries, which will affect, of course, affect the economy. Let me talk about the issue of trust that our colleague from Portugal raised. I am in Parliament now, and we've had battles with the government already. We worry that emergency powers could lead to the erosion of human rights. We worry that emergency powers could be used to go after political opponents. So there is an issue of trust with governments already. And what is compounding that trust deficit? Fake news. You'll be amazed how interconnected our people are through WhatsApp, Facebook. Some people don't trust governments, so they go to WhatsApp and fake news. So when WhatsApp and Facebook says, with an erroneous posting, that 5G is responsible for COVID, yes, even in my country, people went out to burn down mobile towers. They did only one, but in some other countries they believe. When fake news says this was man-made, they believe. So they don't even trust their own governments, what they're saying to them. When fake news begins to give remedies that are not real, our gullible people who are not as sophisticated as you guys in the first one, they believe too. They start self-medicating. So I just wanted to buttress that issue of the challenge of governments to build trust and build followership. Before this call, yesterday and today, I have been on the radio as an opposition leader, trying to support the government so that we build a unified approach to dealing with COVID. But let me touch on something Chad said about the energy system. Chad, I'm in many calls with Irina, with the Rocky Mountain Institute, with some other groups, Friends of Europe, and so on. There's a big discussion that as we reset, or to use the word from Hero about building a new future, people are saying, isn't this the opportunity that yes, we move now to an energy transition where we build new systems that are greener, that will lower emissions significantly because we have 10 years to 2030. That's a big discussion now. But there is also the worry that perhaps COVID might also affect investments in renewable energy. How do we forestall that? How do we make sure we don't lose the gains we've had in the investments in renewable energy for power generation? For poorer countries, we have been having calls with the World Bank, WHO, and others. We're discussing basic issues as how do we ensure the electrification of rural clinics in the front line of fighting COVID. We have 500,000 or more of those kinds of clinics without electricity. But we already had problems with high maternal mortality rates because of the deliveries at night and due to lack of electrification. So that's one set of issues we're saying maybe this is the opportunity to make that case for decentralized distributed energy that can in fact empower those communities to be more resilient by having better healthcare systems, but having access to clean water. In my city, in Freetown, and in other developing country cities, we've told people wash your hands. But they don't have access to clean water. But you need the energy systems to pump that water. Finally, another discussion we're having, Chad. You remember during our tenure as chairs of the advisory group on sustainable energy, we started making the case together with Hillary Clinton and others at that time about the impact of household air pollution. Well, today, household air pollution causes over 4 million premature deaths annually, worse than HIV/AIDS and malaria combined. And that is because they cause pulmonary problems. So in a discussion with WHO yesterday we were having, will COVID be worse in these developing countries because they have large numbers of populations that are using firewood and charcoal and have huge levels of household air pollution, which means they have pre-existing pulmonary conditions amongst women and children. And of course, WHO is beginning to do some analysis now about the bigger impact of outdoor air pollution as well, with pre-existing conditions that could make COVID incidents even worse. So, in conclusion, in resetting, as Chad said earlier, and in building a new future, as Hero was saying, can this new world now be more inclusive and ensure reliable, affordable energy services to ensure that, in fact, we can do better healthcare delivery and have a more resilient population and a more productive population because they have access to energy? Over to you.
Thank you so much, Kande. And thanks for highlighting the systemic nature of this whole situation that we are experiencing. And by that, I mean really this connection that maybe a lot of people don't see in certain parts of the globe between the access to energy and the COVID situation. So thanks for bringing those aspects to the conversation. So we really want to have a conversation among ourselves, but maybe Deborah, I would like to you to see if you would have any comments or any questions to pose to our speakers here. We're starting to get questions that are coming on Zoom. So Deborah, can you hear me? Would you like to react, make any comments?
Thank you. Well, let me thank all our panelists really, really outstanding. And not only have we gotten a deep perspective from each of you, but there's some very important common themes that have run through. And I might just save this till the end, Roberto, when we summarize and let you take some questions from chat. But, you know, I started out, you know, really looking at some of the near-term immediate impacts and challenges of the COVID pandemic, and kind of talked about the disruption, the divergence, the decoupling, deglobalization. We've also heard about de-investment, disparity, potential devastation. But then, which is where we ultimately want to go, the imperative for future. And I would just like to throw out, because we did a lot of work on this actually at the Council on Competitiveness and had a webinar a week ago on the deficit of trust. We have to restore trust, because trust is the glue of civilization. And in order to do that, we're going to have integrity of data, we're going to have transparency, and we're going to have a redoubling down of dedication and a resurrection of devotion to rebuild this and create this new civilization.
Any reactions to Deborah's question? Who would like to weigh in or to provide a perspective? Isabel, Kande, Chad, Hero.
If I may.
Sure.
Just a quick reaction. Yes, I think what we require is also trusted brokers. Where we see this deficit of trust, we need to rebuild, and that was also very, very clear in Kande's assertion, comments. We need to build trust in our leaders. We need to build trust in our business leaders and our politicians. And we need to resort to the institutions that provide for this clue. Well, at this stage, I think science has a leading role in this regard, right? Scientists, health workers, which are on the front line of the fight against the pandemic. We are moving as the old-time seafarers as without seeing land, and we're sort of going about in the dark. There's so much we don't know about this virus. Yesterday, the World Health Organization was speaking of 15,000 genome streams for the virus that have been deciphered so far, but it's a tricky virus that we are learning and trying to find a cure as we go along. So as Deborah was saying, the integrity of data, no matter whether we still have our qualms and our issues about some of the information that is out there, I think science is one of those honest brokers, if we may put it that way. And we must look also to community leaders who are trying to tackle these issues related to uneven access that Kande was talking about. I would also say the media. The media works both ways. It's on the one hand, it is a trusted broker. It can also be a very unreliable broker. And it is important to make a distinction about the sourcing of information. And basically work to bring back trust in the system. Businesses, companies are also are pivotal in this regard.
Isabel, we have a question from our colleague, Jean Madsen, Vice President for Research at the University of Auckland. And Jean really says, so universities have traditionally been major agents of globalization through the movement of students and academic staff. So really the question is, how could we keep that positive, sustain this positive drive and great societal benefit in this time and going forward? Well, what's your take?
Well, my take is that in the face, that's one of the challenges that we have. That's for global mobility. Universities are about global mobility of knowledge and people and education streams. So I think we have to be inventive, adapt, and this is where technology plays a major role. As I was saying earlier, it doesn't take away from continuing the face-to-face campus experience, but certainly there are inventive ways of continuing, especially in the face of de-globalization or this fear of internationalization. We can continue to do our work through technological platforms. Now, that requires investment in infrastructure, and the institutions that have done well have done this investment in the past. It also has an impact on our vision about future investments. Maybe we don't need building infrastructure on the same scale as we did. Maybe there are where your investments go in the short and midterm will have to be reconsidered. But I would see technology here as an important leverage to for universities.
If I, this is Kande. I want to react to two things Isabella raised. One is having honest brokers. This is in that connection, we pray that we don't undermine the credibility of the WHO. We should not forget that they did well with SARS, they did well with H1N1, they did well with Ebola. Let us make sure that we don't erode the credibility of WHO in this very immediate short-term political interest, because it has been an honest broker for a long time, partnering with key research centers around the world and helping us deal with global biosafety. The second point is international cooperation, international scientific cooperation. So, I mean, Isabel mentioned that, and I think that joint learning as we go along in dealing with COVID is important. We need those who can analyze how the responses were done, how political decisions were made, what were the policies that worked. And as we plan this future, apart from technological issues, it's also the institutions we're building. So I hope that in fact, in rebuilding, that we reinforce these international exchanges, scientific exchanges and university exchanges that we used to have, but also exchanges amongst policymakers. And I see one of the benefits now is that with Zoom, there are a number of interparliamentary calls organized by institutions that are saying, look, we need parliamentarians to talk with each other because they have to vote for the stimulus packages, they have to vote for the security measures and so on. So how do we rebuild, create this new global society going forward where we can build this trust because there's information sharing going on and international cooperation? Over to you.
Thanks, Kande. Kande, maybe if you could lower a bit the volume in your side because we're having a return. Thanks for that. I think that you raised this aspect about learning, interparliamentary dialogue. How could we catalyze and accelerate learning? So I have a question related to that to all of you, to all our panelists, learning and action. And actually, Chad Evans, our dear colleague and friend with the GFCC and US Council, has also asked here, what are the concrete things, maybe some of the new collaborations, test beds, and demonstration platforms that we could use to address the challenge that you have highlighted? What could the GFCC, our global community, do in that context about action And connected to that, I have this question about learning. How can we accelerate learning at this point, as we are all learning and trying to figure out the situation? Who would like to share something on things that we could do, potential platforms, test beds that we could deploy and in the GFCC? And also, what's your take on accelerating learning? Maybe, so anyone would like to address that? Maybe Chad, would you have any ideas and comments that you would like to share, or Hiro?
This Chad, Roberto, really good question. I do think it comes back to what we were talking about earlier on trust, because I gotta know who I trust before I know who I want to learn from. And I think governments, businesses, everybody must be much more open with what they know and what they don't know. And they must be willing to talk about their vulnerabilities. Hopefully this will result in trusting science more, because science has always been cross-checked, peer-reviewed, and we can trust true science. And I hope is one of the questions that's come up is, what will this mean for the acceleration of climate related activities to reduce the climate impacts? I hope this means we'll trust scientists more, but I think the scientific community must accept the fact that they must come out and demonstrate that they should be trusted, as opposed to just assuming it will happen. But I certainly hope that's the result.
Thank you, Chad. Hiro, would you like to comment on this, like things that we could do, potentially some even test beds that we could have in the GFCC, but also how we can accelerate learning?
Yes, thank you very much. I think actually the quote in trust is the glue of civilization. That was an excellent point. And I'd like to build on that, because I would say the mindset can be energy to redesign and execute it. Because unless we have a higher purpose mindset, really aiming for, and without bouncing back to where we started, and then we cannot go anywhere. And right now, our mindset is actually perhaps looking forward, because we are kind of forced to do so. But as I said before, we have unless our mindset will stay as it is, or even improve for a better civilization, and then unfortunately, we cannot take action when mindsets are not there. So it's a little bit different way of answering to your question, but I would say trust and mindset will be the fundamental components of redesigning of our next generation of civilization, and so that we can create a better future. And I'm a very strong supporter for SDGs, or global goals, because we have designed, at least illustrated, the better future, the better civilization for all nations. But unless we intend to make them happen, we don't go there. So I think everything. I think we know what needs to be done, and we seem to have many technologies, science, and even methodology to make them happen. But I think our mindset has to improve, really, to make these goals happen. So I stop here. Over to you.
Thank you. So we have a mindset gap to address. Thanks for that, Hiro. Just building on what you said, and also a question you mentioned, the interparliamentary dialogue. What are the tools that you see that this community and maybe other communities we could reach out and engage could use to accelerate that type of learning and to promote or to foster this mindset shift that Hiro has commented?
Well, I see that an immediate support you can give is, now that we know there are already disruptions of supply chains, and we anticipate, in fact, that will get worse. Maybe it is an opportunity to link with chambers of commerce in some countries in some kind of an advisory role by using digital platforms. We are all discovering how useful the digital platforms, Zoom, WebEx, and others have become very necessary in the lockdown. So I think for you, that's an immediate step. On the parliamentary side, of course, every parliament has a finance committee. They have committees dealing with economic planning. It might be a stretch for you. However, maybe you can have a discussion where you have some selected members of parliament that have been involved in putting the stimulus packages together. I have no doubt that some of their discussions were very in-depth, looking at how they rebuild their economies, or in fact, how they prevent collapse. So there could be some thinking already now about building back differently. So I think that if you have a mixed call, where you have some of your GCF members and some of those from Europe, Japan, US, and the emerging economies, politicians who are on their finance or appropriations committee that have been deep in this discussion. One of the calls we had 2 weeks ago, organized by the World Bank and IMF, that's what they did. This is their own parliamentary forum. And they pulled in people who were dealing with stimulus package in South Africa, Brazil, other locations, just to talk about what they were doing in the fiscal space to prevent collapse of their economies and what they see coming down the pipe. So I think you can do a mixed call where your industry leaders can gain from those insights and vice versa. What the politicians can gain from the work your industry reps are really doing to keep their supply chains open, or the collaboration we want to see in the future. I mean, I'm very impressed to see that Ghana is producing their own PPE. I wish we could do that here. But maybe they can begin to do cheaper PPEs for companies in the United States. It's not only Asians that can produce this stuff. That was just meant as a tease to Hero. Over to you.
Thanks, Kande. We have a question that I believe really connects to different points that Isabel and Deborah and Hero and all of you actually comment about. And so we're creating more knowledge around the globe today. And just as an example, when 3 months after SARS, we had like 41 reports, medical reports being created. And in the 3 months after the outbreak of COVID, we have almost 3,000. So we're creating a lot of content and knowledge, and we still are learning. But to what extent this more scientific literate society, or the creation of information and science, it's really being disseminated in social media and enlightening the discussion or not? I think that Shuin from Might Malaysia has asked a bit really if we have evidence that the public debate is improving or not. What's your take? What's your take, Isabel? Are we succeeding in enlightening the public debate?
Yeah, I think we are succeeding partly, and I think one of the glamorous side and the miserable side of social media is that they are great platforms for the dissemination of solid information, but also for all kinds of fake information. And we've had enormous amounts of truthful and untruthful information. And even that is part and parcel of the development of science, that you have contradictory scientific approaches to the same event and to the same and with the same set of data. That is part and parcel of the scientific discussion. But for the non-scientific reader of this data, this contradiction may lend itself to a number of fake or false perceptions. Now, what I think is key here is also to enhance an area that universities have been investing strongly in the past years, but that needs certainly more investment, which is science communication. It is important for scientists not only to speak to their own communities and amongst themselves. We have to be more savvy in the way we simplify complex information and put it out there. That is certainly, that is not the absolute solution, but it is one of the solutions to make, on the one hand, to bring science closer to citizens, and on the other, to combat misinformation.
Thank you, Isabel. We are approaching the end of our conversation here. Deborah, I would like to turn to you to react to the things that we heard, and then maybe we go for a very quick final round with each one of our speakers, and then we can finalize. Deborah, any comments, reactions on the things that we heard today?
Yes, thank you. Well, I want to thank all of our amazing panelists and leaders in the GFCC. Chad, Isabel, Hero, Conde, you were all not only tremendously insightful, but what you have conveyed, putting it together really in a system, in my view, comes down to a really core issue around civilization. And I love that Hero really articulated his comments in the context of civilization, because that is really what makes us human beings. And I was just thinking here, you know, when you look back at the development of our humanity, our ability to survive and prosper and grow as human beings was based on cooperation. We know humans are social beings. One of the reasons we're so unhappy right now is we like to be around other people. And so being in lockdown and quarantine and not being with people is against our fundamental DNA. But trust is at the heart of this. And I want to just bring us back to the issue of trust and the deficit of trust. So if you just bear with me for 1 minute here, you know, the Roman goddess Fides was the goddess of trust. And her counterpart, the Roman god Sanctus, was the god of oaths and faith. So Fides and Sanctus were the two Roman mythological god and goddesses that really enabled the bonds of honesty, trust, oath, and faith. And today in the English language, we use, and other languages, we use the expression, do you have your bona fides? And that is a fundamental issue right now as we build this new civilization, because at the core is going to be, how do we build and restore trust and able to do all the things we have to do? And I think doing some GFCC work around this concept of trust and ethics links to our work we've done in the past on our principles on transparency. So I want to recommend for one of our upcoming calls that we invite our colleague, Jim Clifton, the CEO of Gallup, to join us as well and continue this discussion, because Gallup has done an incredible deep dive around the world on trust. And the data not very good. Notwithstanding, our governments are losing trust, and the only institution, and media, governments and media have the highest quotients of lost trust. And so the real issue is, how do we restore trust? How do we build trust? And some case studies would be very interesting. And I just want to throw one out because they're members of the GFCC. And interestingly, in Europe, Greece has had an incredible success in how they have dealt with COVID and how they have built trust and engendered trust in how their government and citizens have dealt with this. And so there are many lessons to be learned, including the role of science. Because in the case of Greece, the main communicator of information of what to do and not to do was from a very respected scientist. And the population, granted it's a small population, came together around that and built trust throughout their communities, as well as other institutions, including the religious organization. So I would like to, recommend that we continue in this series this theme of Stone to designing the future and building a new capacity for growth, inclusive prosperity throughout the world. And I'm going to leave that, Roberto, as my final remark, and you could, the other panelists as well.
Thank you, Deborah. So I really would like to invite you all to go for a quick round, like a minute, your take on this conversation, and then I'll take 1 minute just to close. We're running over time here. So Chad, would like you to go first.
Roberto, thank you very much. Again, this has been an excellent exchange, and I encourage you to do more. My congratulations on you starting it off. What struck me is we've had an hour and a half on COVID-19, and we haven't talked about COVID-19. We have talked about all the major changes that may occur in the world as a result of this. And I think that's why this has been such a useful call. But it is massive because of the simultaneous way this crisis has hit the entire world. Shame on us if we don't take advantage of the change that's possible from this. And that's what I'd like us all to take away from it. We must not when this is solved, let's go back to business as usual. We must learn from it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad. Hero?
Well, in 10, 20, 30 years, I'm sure we'll have a book called People in 2020. Okay, Leaders in 2020. Let us say that in the future, our children, grandchildren will look back look at us and thought we did an amazing job by designing a better civilization. And thanks to people in 2020, we have a better life. I hope our future generation will say that and thanking us, from the future. So, but we have to work a lot to make it happen.
Thank you, Hero. Thank you, Hero. You actually mentioned leadership. That will be my final comment. Isabel?
Well, thank you, Roberto and Deborah, this session highlights that the future lies in global collaboration. And I think the insights we had from the panelists really show that there is not one solution to the crisis. It's going to be a mix, and that we have to be attentive to the global diversity and to the singularity of each situation, but also be willing to continue to work together. And this is also about rebuilding trust, credibility, trusting each other, and the GFCC is doing great work in this regard. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Isabel. Candid, your overall thoughts on this conversation and say what we have learned.
We have learned that we are still very interconnected. If one part of the world solves the COVID problem and the other part becomes an epicenter, we will all still be at risk. So in rebuilding the new future, let us make sure that there is global solidarity, global cooperation to ensure that we have inclusive growth and development so that we have a more peaceful and stable world. And indeed, we have an opportunity here to also promote energy transitions, which will underpin this new economy that we'll see post-COVID as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kande. I think that all across this conversation, you highlighted aspects that are truly systemic. So I have 4 takeaways from this conversation. One is the systemic nation, let's say the systemic nature of this whole thing that we're living through, but also that we should not take for granted that the realities are the same. And that's really important to understand diversity in the different perspectives around the globe. I think that you kind of mentioned this connection between health and financial capacity. So it's really important to do that. We talk a lot about the emergence of new opportunities or new models. I think this is my second takeaway here. Isabel, you talked about education. Chad gave a fantastic example coming from business. I think that we will see more and more of that. Then third thing, we talk about society and trust. I think probably that was the thing that we discussed the most in this conversation. But then this notion that we can change reality by design, but that will only happen, my fourth point, and thanks for that, Hiro, if we have the right mindset, or say we're a different mindset in place. Those are my 4 topics. As I said, we'll create a short summary of this. We took note on some of the questions, so we'll be reaching out and trying to capture those aspects. But I will leave it here with really a big thank to all of you for sharing what you are seeing and learning. Thanks a lot for bringing different perspectives to this conversation, but also with a request. And here I'll turn to you. But my request, because I believe that we heard that, it's if each one of you could reflect, and I'll be in contact with you offline about leadership and how important leadership is and how different it needs to be at this moment to connect all those dots. Hiro, I know that you want to say something. Please proceed.
No, that was a mistake. Don't worry about it.
Okay, so having said that, I think that Deborah, would you like to say something?
I just want to again thank everyone for joining us for the inaugural GFCC dialogue conversations. It was richer and more rewarding than I think, but it underscores the fundamental importance of this organization that we launched in 2010. I know that many of us were looking forward to all being together this November in Australia for our annual meeting and the Global Innovation Summit. The good news I will share is that we are going to be together in November, and those of you who are with us today as panelists and others participating in this webinar, we hope you will be with us as well as participants and speakers for a virtual summit. We're going to take advantage of technology and connectivity to be able to come together to continue the discussions that we will be building up over this series between now and November to carry forward the work of the GFCC. We care about our countries, we care about our communities, but all of us care about our world, and working together, we can both redesign, reboot, but I think very importantly, innovate to a sustainable, inclusive future for all of us. So thank you, Roberto, for your leadership. Roberto's down in Brazil. We are truly global today on this conversation, but how we're doing our work. So I want to really commend you, Roberto, for your leadership in developing the concept and designing this fantastic series of GFCC conversations. And so I wish everybody health and safety and well-being. And I will say, I look forward to being together in person in due course. So thank you so very much.
Thank you, and thank you, Deborah. And I have a final ask. If you could turn on your cameras, if you could turn on your camera, Deborah and Chad, we'll take a group picture here, a virtual group picture. Let me, Deborah, let's see. Yeah, let's wait for Deborah. Yeah, so here we go. Yeah, I'll share that with you. Thank you so much for joining. You all panelists, you hear from me with this request on your insights on leadership and what's changing now. And for all of you who are watching us, please take a note. We'll be back on May the 20th. We're having a conversation on response, really focusing more on the short term, looking at for different lenses, all connected as we learned today, health and economy and society. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all. It's wonderful.